always skeptical of people who say, I don't care what people think. That tells me you're not pro-social. You just gave me an indicator. You're not kind, you're not generous, you're not thoughtful. So although it's cool, it sounds cool to say that, you really want to be saying, I care what people think, but I don't weigh it too heavily when I evaluate myself. So one of the things that could make you more courageous in the moment is before you go into a situation, remind yourself, you are not your ideas. You are not what happens in this meeting. You, as an entity, as a self, is sophisticated. There's a past, there's a now, there's a future orientation of what you imagine your life being. All of these complexities that make you you, you want to acknowledge this seemingly irrelevant other sides of who you are before you enter into the arena. And by doing so, you then feel psychologically that myself is not at stake if I get a thumbs up or a thumbs down with this decision.
Hello, and welcome to the Show Your Value podcast, where we explore the art of value creation in three macro buckets: material value creation, emotional energy value creation, and spiritual value creation. I'm your host, Lee Benson, and today my very special guest is Todd Kashdan. Todd was awarded the 2013 Distinguished Early Career Researcher Award by the American Psychological Association. Todd was also among the top experts on the psychology of well-being, psychological strengths, mental agility, and social relationships. His research has been featured in hundreds of media outlets, including multiple articles in Harvard Business Review, the New York Times, Fast Company, Forbes, and an interview on the #1 science podcast, Hidden Brain. As a professor of psychology, Todd translates state-of-the-art science into practical applications to improve our everyday lives. He gave a TEDx talk on psychological flexibility, and over 5 million readers enjoy his Psychology Today blog and Provoked newsletter. Todd has authored 5 books, including The Art of Insubordination, How to Dissent and Defy Effectively, which I read getting ready for this discussion. And there's so many places this can go. I am super curious about where this is gonna lead to today, because it's, I think, one of the most important value-added things that we can do in the world. So Todd, thank you for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for that great introduction.
Yeah, and where are you calling in from today?
I am 10 miles outside of my well-being lab at George Mason University in Fairfax, Virginia.
Very nice. Yeah, I'm here in Arizona. It's just an absolutely beautiful day out here.
It's always pickleball weather.
Yeah, that's true. We have hot and nice. Those are our 2 seasons. We're currently still in the nice season, which is great. So to open this up, what caused you to get on this path of showing the value of effective insubordination? I mean, this is such a cool thing you're doing to bring this value to the world.
Yeah, there's a short and long answer. The short answer is there are some really interesting sociological trends. So you have the least spiritual, which is great with your opening, because the least spirituality and least religiosity ever in the history of the United States. You have the lowest number of friends per person as an adult in the history of the United States, particularly so in adulthood, particularly so in men. And then you have this really important trend that I don't think we're spending enough time on, which is right now, while we may not feel that there is pure equality between men and women, you are seeing in the school system, mandatory schooling, kindergarten to 12th grade high school, that boys are suffering more in the classroom in terms of delinquency, lower graduation rates. That trajectory is going in a really bad direction. And almost all of the focus is on girls and women and not on the boys. And a society needs help for both sexes. So we need to break the status quo. We need to be thinking about shaking things up and really stop asking the question, why are we doing things the same way as we've always done them, when we can really at any point in time say that we can modify the system and not just tinker with it.
Yeah, and that goes to, how do you know that you're being effective? Because blowing things up, and I feel like in this country we have a culture of everybody being an expert, at least a lot of people an expert on what's wrong with people and things and why stuff won't work with no solution on the other side to make it any better. I don't find that very productive, but I'm curious what your thoughts are on how can you be an effective, person practicing principled insubordination?
Yeah, it's a great thing that you raised. So let me pull in a different direction first, which is that I think we underestimate a single dissenting voice that may be wrong on the issue in terms of how they liberate other people in the group to be more mentally challenged to think about, are they going in the right direction? And so you could have someone in a university meeting that is homophobic, sexist, racist, describes their ideas calmly, is completely in the wrong, and yet the things they say might push people just to ask the question of, I don't I don't agree with you, but I wonder if we're pushing too hard on this topic. And I wonder if we thought about the precedent for trying to focus on diversity, inclusion, belonging. And so I do want to give a plug of we need dissenting voices even when they suck.
Hmm. Okay, I love that. And I actually agree. No matter what's going on, I look at it and I just keep this mantra in my head: where's the value? Where's the value? Where's the value? There's always something there that can be leveraged to create more value going forward. 100% agree. And it's nice to be super productive, which gets into the effectiveness of being, a dissenter. So yeah, talk about that.
Yeah, so there's a number of strategies to being effective. One of the most important ones is you have to show that you are a consistent, valued member of the in-group. You are a good team member. You have commitment. You have skin in the game. You've done the hard work. And you sometimes have to be non-humble about this and say, you need to know over the past 20 years, I have worked for this company. You've seen me get in here early. You see me sometimes I'm here on a weekend. And this is the opening salvo for you to reveal why you disagree with where the room is going in terms of their direction, why you think that the decision that they made is actually faulty and hasn't been thoroughly thought through. By doing that, you get people to think of this is someone who's trustworthy through behavioral evidence. You want behavioral evidence that you are a good person to listen to. So you don't want it to be about your popularity. And the way to do that is to create the list for people.
Okay, yeah, makes a lot of sense. I find it helpful to agree on at least directionally the value that we're trying to create. So when all this stuff is going on, it's relatively productive. For example, I work with some pretty large companies, tens of billions of dollars in market cap around their strategy, and I'll ask, well, what's the return on investment for doing each of these things? And it could be a DEI program, but it could be really anything. And they don't really think about that. They're just doing this stuff a lot of times because it looks good, feels good, and sounds good, not nearly as productive as we're doing it to create this value. What do you think about that directionally?
Yeah, there's some good science to back Lee exactly what you're saying, which is instead of focusing on the issue at hand, figure out what are the moral foundations of what you're talking about. Are you talking about reducing harm? Are you talking about increasing justice? Are you talking about focusing on allies? Are you talking about appreciating and respecting authorities or your elders? So if you can get to the core underlying issue, you find that a lot of these camps really agree with each other. So the pro-choice and the anti-abortion camp, most of them are focusing on the sanctity of the physical body. One focuses on bodily autonomy. The other one's focusing on in terms of what should be disrupted, what shouldn't be disrupted. So you move away from the political hot potato and just start with we all care about young women. We all care about people that don't have access to information about what they should do. What are the consequences of their actions? So we're all on the same page there. So detail that first, and then let's see when we get to the point where we disagree, as opposed to assuming we are on opposite sets of the divide. Put on your boxing mitts and let's start just kind of duking it out. And what that does is it lowers people's defenses. And they're like, I wonder where Lee's going to go with this, as opposed to, oh, Lee's on the other side. So let's just start bashing him and attacking his ideas instantaneously.
Yeah, the approach to that, I think, could be challenging. I've seen people be so incredibly right on everything, but they're wrong because the result didn't happen the way they presented it. And so how do you become a successful, dissenter? What are some strategies there, which you're starting to touch on here, that would help the folks listening?
So one of the most important ones, especially if you're working in an organization or a team, it could be the Parent Teacher Association, could be you work for the Boston Celtics, it could be Google, is that you want to think about who's going to be your biggest adversary for the idea that you're going to bring up. Before the group gets convenes and gets together, you want to meet with them individually. So no one's focusing on how many likes they get, how many cheers they get for their opinion, and let them know why you're approaching them. You're a really deep critical thinker. I think if there's anyone that can improve and tinker my idea, it's you. And I don't think we're going to be on the same side of this. So help me by pointing out all the flaws in my thinking. And so when you meet with that person, it's like a little bit of psychological jujitsu. They now become your collaborator, your co-creator. And when you meet with the group, you make sure to give them credit, partial credit for what you're doing, and saying, I just want to thank ahead of time, Chuck, Diane, talking to them made me think better and made me realize that I can't do this by myself. And then you reveal your idea. You've now triggered people's curiosity. They are intrigued. Wait, how are you working with Diane? I would think the two of you would be on opposite sides. Oh, this is so cool. Like, this is like a, constructive adversary relationship I'm about to look at. And so again, people's defenses come down. They're going to be more exploratory, and you've diffused the bomb that was probably going to go off in the meeting, because that person now, if they attack your idea, they're kind of attacking themselves.
Yeah, and they won't be ambushed, really, right? Because they will feel attacked that way. Uh, so when you're doing this stuff, it's going to feel uncomfortable. There's a lot of common viewpoints out there that I'd say in the last several years we've seen significant pushback. Whether it's political or otherwise, safety oriented, et cetera. But when you really believe you've got a different way, you're dissenting, you're going after it. What's the advice for how we can arm ourselves to be okay going through that? I mean, I've gotten to a place where, I care what people think because I want to know what's going on and all that. But if I feel really passionate about something, it's okay if they attack me. Like but most people can't handle that. They just don't. They don't want the conflict. They don't want to be seen in an unfavorable light. Talk about that. How do we do that better? Arm ourselves better.
Yeah. And Lee, I like what you said, because I'm always skeptical of people who say, I don't care what people think. That tells me you're not pro-social. You just gave me an indicator. You're not kind. You're not generous. You're not thoughtful. So although it's cool, it sounds cool to say that, you really want to be saying what you said, which is, I care what people think, but I don't weight it too heavily when I evaluate myself. So one of the things that could make you more courageous in the moment is, before you go into a situation, you're giving a TED talk, you're meeting with a group of people, you're about to send the email, is remind yourself. This is why you can have pictures in your wallet. You could have whatever your desktop images on your computer of your kids, your family, your loved ones, your pets, your great trip to Bryce National Park, whatever it is, to remind you that you are not your ideas. You are not what happens in this meeting. You, as an entity, as a self, is sophisticated. There's a past, there's a now, there's a future orientation of what you imagine your life being. You've got tons of stories of hanging out with friends and hanging out with family and working out in the gym and learning different sports and, developing yourself by reading books by Robert Greene and Malcolm Gladwell and Ryan Holiday. All of these complexities that make you you. You want to acknowledge this seemingly irrelevant other sides of who you are before you enter into the arena. And by doing so, you then feel psychologically that myself is not at stake if I get a thumbs up or a thumbs down with this decision.
Yeah, it's important to me to. Well, let me back up. If I was going to have one most important number for me personally, it would be internal fulfillment, which over time I see that growing and growing. It can go up and down a little bit, but the trend is always going up. And happiness kind of does what it does. I love it when it's there. When it's not there, that's just part of the game. To me, that's how I think about it. But in terms of being, really solid with myself and what I'm doing in the world, I want to be creating real measurable, objectively measurable value, whether it's material, emotional energy, or spiritual. For me, they have to be in balance. And I think for all the time it takes to develop the material value creation piece, which seems like most people really focus there, even when they're virtue signaling, saying it's not about that, you look under the covers, it's mostly about that for a lot of folks. Do it for as long as it takes to be good at that. And I've had exits from a few million to well in 9 figures with different businesses of mine, and I'm still in the game and I absolutely love it. It takes just as long, I believe, to be good at the emotional energy cultivation to create value there, as well as the spiritual side. So I want to have that in balance. I want to be going forward. I feel over time significantly different. It's really been hard to articulate, but it's better, for me when I think about it that way in every interaction. How do you get people away from virtue signaling, saying what they think they're supposed to say, and actually practicing real virtue so they actually feel better? I mean, this is your area of expertise. You thought so deeply about this. So impressive doing research on you.
Yeah, there's a great study by Jack Goncalves at Cornell University on this, and he talks about if you have members of a group and you ask them ahead of time before you're about to have the discussion, I want you to describe 3 things that make you different from everyone else in this room. So what makes Lee unique? What makes Todd unique? It's kind of like, and you think it like stacking. Like there's no one else on earth that has the qualities of they're interested in stoicism, they're a shot putter, and they have 3 daughters and they're a twin, except for me. So very quickly, in only like 3 combinatorial steps, do you become the most unique person that ever walked the earth at any time in history. And so it's worth asking this question to people of what makes you different. Name 3 ways you're different. You don't have to do it out loud. You can have people break up into 2 people and then ask them the follow-up question, which is, what are 3 ways that the group would benefit from your unique perspective and lens from everyone else here? You do those 2 questions on a regular basis. And basically, you're asking people to prioritize what makes you unique that other people have in this room for the puzzle, as opposed to, I'm going to seek out likability. I'm going to seek out conformity. I'm going to seek out harmony and positivity, all good things, but not in the context of decision making, especially for a group. In a group, you don't want harmony. You don't want positivity. You want the best decision making possible to get the best possible outcome. And later, go celebrate at Arby's or, some dank Irish pub or, go play cornhole later. But you have to create a culture where you grant people the freedom to be autonomous thinkers, be critical, focus on the ideas and not the people sharing those ideas. But you have to remind people every single time because we all go back to our defaults. And one of the mistakes that a lot of organizations do is they do this one time. The leader comes out, doesn't matter what their title is. It could be just a socially attractive person that everybody wants to hang out with. Some leader comes out and says, you know what? We need more productive disagreements in this room. Everyone nods their head. You got to get out of your comfort zone. Everyone nods their head. This is 50% of Harvard Business Review articles. Get out of your comfort zone. That's where the good stuff happens. But if you only say it once, people will turn right back to their default personality pattern. So I'm a big fan of having like a mental checklist in the beginning on every single meeting, piece of paper they've got to check off, just like your doctor's office. Like, do you have tuberculosis? Do you have COVID right now? Are you coughing? And then you hand it in. And so you just check off of, are you going to be independent in your thinking in this room? Are you going to be critical of ideas, but not the people sharing those ideas? Are you willing to actually second guess your thoughts based on new information that people bring into the room? You all know the right answer, but you want to prime people to think that way before the discussion takes place.
Yeah, I've always thought of it as full contact value creation.
Oh, I
And
like that term.
I think about one of my businesses that I sold in 2016. We grew from 3 employees to over 500. We were doing business in over 60 countries, probably 2,000 customers out there, and it was aviation aftermarket repair and overhaul. Everybody knew their numbers. Everybody acted like the CEO of their own role. And it wouldn't matter if I was in the room or anybody else. If somebody had something that they thought would create a better outcome, they went for it, even going after me. And I even kind of learned that, and I think it was good practice for me, substance over style. If they're super passionate for the end result, but they even forget to be a little bit respectful, but there's substance there, it's like, this is so good, right? If their motivations are something else, and that's not healthy, but I think we can lose our ability to be as respectful, maybe or tactful as we should when we're really going for an outcome. But I love that environment, right? And how do you create that culture? What are your thoughts on creating this culture? Because I think most business leaders really want that across the board, but they don't know how to do it. They talk about culture, and it's pretty clear quickly they don't really know what they're talking about.
Yeah. Well, Lee, let me just flip the directional arrow. I mean, it sounds like you did that. So how do you get people to not to grab the podium and not wait to be picked and be their own leader and not wait for their leadership role to be anointed to them? Like you did that. Like, how did you do that?
Yeah, well, for me, it was just hyper focus on the value we're creating as an organization. So at the top, like the one number that says above all others, we're winning or losing the game, and it's a reflection or a measurement of the value of the organization. Because I always viewed my role as primarily continually increasing the value of the company, and it's good for everybody in so many ways. And the emotional energy created, which was the X factor for leaders. The spiritual piece, which for me is just connectedness to myself first, and then family, friends, but the community, the team members that I work with, and all the communities that we touch, all kind of subordinate to that. But not getting those two things right significantly limits the ability of an organization to increase its value. So everything was about that. Every team had a most important number. And then the question is, what's the best work that you're doing to improve that? And it kept everybody focused on that outcome. And then all of these outcomes for every team, 64 plus teams in the organization when I sold it, were all aligned, accreting to the top, knowing that the X factor to make that happen faster and better is going to be the spiritual and the emotional energy value creation. Which, by the way, Todd, I view emotional energy, positive emotional energy, as the scarcest commodity on the planet. When it's on 10 for me, I can do anything. My leg falls off, whatever. I've got another one. When it's on 1, I get a flat tire and my day's run, right? So
Yeah.
anyway, that's just a little bit of what I was able to do. And just people are so happy, so passionate, running through walls, having fun, working really hard. And what I noticed is the harder it got, the harder we laughed.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you can so you describing that you can hear a bunch of the constituent parts of what makes an organization. So one is there's a shared language. Like you were creating your own vocabulary. So when you're talking about the emotional energy and then and the spiritual connections, that's your organization. Those are not terms that you hear in the firehouse that's in Fairfax County near me. And so you have to figure out shared language, nicknames you have for each other, a great sign of that, a great indicator of that fun that you're talking about, right? Can you actually like jostle each other, like kind of be playful towards each other and not take it personally? Nicknames are a great place to start because it's not about the work itself. It's just how seriously do you take yourself, and are you willing to realize that you got foibles and we're all going to kind of pick on each other innocently, or are you going to be incredibly offended on a regular basis if that occurs on nicknames? And we're assuming it's not like too malevolent of a nickname. Then we can only imagine what's going to happen in the room when someone disagrees with you. So in some ways, you could think about this even for onboarding. In the first 2 weeks, be really careful to look for when people offend and when people are offended, and see if you can intervene in a way that redirects them towards what's helpful in this culture. We tease each other. It's playful. It's like think of it as like siblings, and don't think of it as this is your reputation on the line. This is going to be in your performance review. And if you take things, very personally, it's something to have a conversation one on one, but maybe not in front of the whole group, and figure out, do they mean well, or are they trying to undermine you? And assume benevolent intent until proven otherwise. So all these little pieces, I mean, it's kind of just like being in a high school athletic team. All these little pieces, though, I think often we think they're going to fit in naturally, because if the leader is very socially skilled, it's very hard to understand people that are at the 50th percentile in social skills or the 70th percentile in social skills. And it's a similar vein, to make an analogy. Some of the best athletes are horrible coaches. Like Wayne Gretzky is known, one of the best hockey players of all time, for those who are listening that don't know. He was a terrible coach because everything came so naturally to him. He was so graceful. He had such agility and such endurance, and his hand-eye coordination was wild, that he couldn't imagine how you can verbalize to someone that doesn't have those skills. So he was a terrible coach. And I think in the same vein, those people that are very socially skilled tend to underestimate people that struggle with, how much eye contact should you make? How many seconds before it becomes creepy? How many seconds before you should turn away? Like if you're listening, how often should you nod your head? Some people really have to think about this almost mechanically, and we can be playful about them, but we also have to be compassionate. Playful plus compassionate is really important in the development of each individual person in a team. And to make that happen, you have to clarify, these are the kind of things I'm going to be doing with each one of you. And no, it's because I care about you reaching your potential.
Yeah, I think about developing everybody appropriately all the time. Doesn't matter what the interaction is. Could be a team member that works for me. It could be anybody. I mean, it doesn't matter. And one of the things that is always fascinating to me is I'll watch leaders do it in a room. They'll talk about a concept that we want to go this direction, and several won't really understand it or fully get it. And the leader will say, "Oh, they don't understand this. They'll never get it." And then I ask the question, "Well, how long did it take you to actually fully get that?" "Well, like 10 years. Can we give them at least 10 minutes to kind of go through it?" So when we think about developing, we're planting seeds that grow, right, over time, not you either get it or you don't, even though it might have taken me 20 years to really understand something. So any thoughts on having a development perspective? And I think this applies to parents as well.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I mean, across the board. I mean, I have 3 daughters on a regular basis. One of them is my workout partner right now, one of my 17-year-old twin daughters. I'm a twin with twins. And then what I love is I have her for a year and a half before she goes to college. And so there are lots of men. She looks older. So lots of men are often approach her. They're talking to her. They're asking her out. They're doing these things. And so we deconstruct these events. To me, they're like low grade threats because they're annoying. Once they find out her age, they're like, "Oh my God, I had no idea. I thought you were like 25. I didn't realize you were 17, that you're a minor." And so I want her to experience that. I want to be there and do those retrospectives of, okay, if we had a do-over, what could you have said? What could you have done differently? What was the early signs that this person was kind of going to be annoying as opposed to harming versus helpful in the situation? As she's developing situational awareness from us just working out in the gym. And I think we don't have time to do that one-on-one level of mentorship in situ, like in the moment with everyone. But it's worthwhile thinking about, when this arises in the moment, when can we take advantage of this as this opportunity? I want to break into all of its constituent parts to say, why was this situation? You were so comfortable. You were so effusive. You were so social and gregarious. You were like glowing, as you were saying, with this like little strong emotional energy. It feels to me like this was different than other times I've seen you in front of a group. So let's figure out what that was so we can replicate it as much as possible. So not just for the bad moments, but the bright spots. And I think, as you're saying, as leaders, what we often do is symbolically pat them on the head and be like, "That was an amazing job," and kind of pat them on the head, as opposed to, "Wait, I want more moments like this. I want to figure out, what were you thinking and feeling beforehand? What was your mindset? What did the room do? What was the task like? Like this here is a soundboard of tons of information about how I can get the operator's manual of what makes you excel, because you just did it in a moment.
Yeah, and as you're talking, it's kind of in this, for me, the category of getting on a productive track, a fulfillment track, for an individual. And in your book, you talk about the ability to endure pain and having that be a direct reflection of the quality of your life in some way. I'm definitely paraphrasing. And I've gotten to a place where I have to be uncomfortable almost all the time, but I've got this level of it that works for me. It's like an uncomfortable sweet spot zone, right? And over time, as I cultivate that, I can do more. Feels the same, even though it's a lot more, and it would have killed me 10 years ago if I was hanging out there right now today. Talk about that and how to get there, because I think it's really good. And I assume, maybe this is obviously one of my confirmation biases, is that everybody would be better if they could get on that track and learn to be a little uncomfortable for them and then accelerate that over time, what they can handle. Maybe that's not the case, but yeah, talk about that. I find that fascinating.
No, this is great because we're going into the details. So as opposed to just stopping at get out of your comfort zone, what are the exact tactics and strategies to get there? So let me reveal one of my favorite studies, which was, it actually wasn't even published. It was people that were addicted to cannabis, and they wanted to know what predicted them relapsing or staying the course in terms of cutting off and just completely stop using. And what they found was, in the first 2 days, when you decide to cold turkey to stop smoking cannabis, the greatest predictor was the degree that you can tolerate the distress of the physical symptoms of withdrawal. So you're going to have an increased heart rate. You're going to have shaky hands. You might have headaches. You might have stomach ache that happens there. This is going to happen. And if you went back to taking cannabis, it's going to reduce those symptoms. It's the same thing as alcohol or anything you're trying to withdraw from that has a chemical reaction in you. So what allows someone to tolerate that physical distress when trying to stop using a drug? It's the same thing that in social interactions, which is one of the key things is interoceptive awareness. And all that means is you are aware of the change in your bodily sensations. And I don't want to just say this is mindfulness, because I think that steals a little bit from this. I think very carefully, awareness of the delta, your change in your physical body in particular ways. So if you are going in front of a room, and let's say, Lee, you're the CFO, CEO, and you're saying, Todd, I need you to tell people what you told me about what we should be doing in the next quarter in the company. As soon as you call my name, I should be experiencing, 5 beat per minute increase in my heart rate. I should have like a little bit of sweat, galvanic skin response in my fingers. I should have a little bit of tension probably in my legs or my neck or my shoulder. You need to know what's going to happen to your body and what's happening. If you're not aware of that, you're not realizing your body is experiencing physiological arousal. You will naturally interpret that as fear, but it's the exact same physiological blueprint as excitement and eagerness. And so if you have high interoceptive awareness, which you can develop by just paying attention throughout the day of how you're changing physically, then I can frame this. I can reframe as Lee hands the mic over to me that, Todd, of course you're excited. You have the undivided attention of a lot of people you respect. This is an awesome opportunity because you now have a lead liked what you had to say, and now you're going to get a bunch of other people to like what you say. Just me saying that self-talk, that mental chatter allows me to have the exact same physical sensation that makes me want to run, fear, and interpret it as excitement and eagerness that makes me want to stick around and like be a giver. I want to give you stuff. I want to offer all the stuff that's in my head, and I want to hear what you have to say. And this is something that's very learnable. This isn't a personality trait. This is a metacognition, thinking about thinking, like being physically aware of your physical changes. And that's something that just comes from having the language, paying close attention to what's happening, and then also using it as a springboard to a internal thought process to say, this is good, because it would mean something different. If I had no physiological change as I got the microphone, that kind of means I'm indifferent and I don't care. I want people to get all aroused and excited. I tell my kids all the time before they play sports, I want you to be upset. I want you to cry sometimes after you lose. Tells me you care. And it's going to motivate you to want to do something. And if someone fails at something, you want someone to be disappointed and sad or guilty. And your job as an emotionally intelligent leader is to work with that material. And again, I think we often, as leaders, give up those opportunities.
Yeah, interesting. Once you're aware of this and you're starting to work on it, how long before, in your view, people can be comfortable trusting the struggle? I've gotten to a place where, hey, this is really hard, but I know it's going to be great when I come out the other side because it has every other one of the 100+ times. When do they get comfortable with that, and how long do they have to cultivate it to get there, in your view?
That is such a good question. I'm going to take it in this way. So there's a lot of people that talk about how long does it take for a habit to make? And the answer is we're so idiosyncratic that what it'll take for each person will differ. I will tell you this. I do these exercises with organizations. In one single instance, you could ask them to reframe your physiological arousal right now as excitement instead of anxiety. And in one single instance, they'll come alive. So I often have this thing where I'll kind of like I'll have something on the screen, such like maybe like an album cover, like Pink Floyd The Wall. And then I'll basically ask for a volunteer. I will say nothing about the Pink Floyd The Wall album cover. And I'll listen, we're about to do corporate karaoke right now. So you're going to have 30 seconds to come up with the song. I'm going to play the YouTube lyrics there, so in case you forget the lyrics, and we'll have the musical accompaniment in the background. And then I'll ask them, how do you feel right now? Like 0 to 10. In terms 0, you're in a bubble bath, you're chilling. 10, you're about to pull out your hair and just sprint out of here. And people are often like they're almost in panic attack mode. And then I whisper in their ear. I'm like, this is what I want you to do in terms of your self-talk. I want you to say that I asked them for what they're experiencing physically. My heart rate is higher. My blood pressure is higher. I'm all tense right now because I'm super excited. I get to sing the exact song I want right in front of these people. And I close my eyes and I'm going to be like, I'm going to be like live. This is going to be a wacky experience. I'm going to be talking about for months from now. One single moment of reframing. And they can do it. Because what we care less about, are you comfortable? I forgot exactly. I love how you framed it. Like that you are comfortable with the process, but more that can you perform to your skill level and intellect in the moment, I think is what's more important.
Yeah. Trust and value the struggle and getting to that point. And I don't put it in the category of how long does it take to form a habit. And I completely agree with you. It's different for everybody and it depends on the thing. This is something that there's like no end to how much you can value it. And you could be cultivating it for years, I think. And I believe there's no end to the value any of us can actually create out there. We don't, it's unknowable from my perspective in there. So this something you talk about in the book, find a group of allies together. And I hear a lot of folks, especially leaders of organizations saying it's lonely at the top and I don't have anybody, that really gets it. And I say, well, you're lonely by choice because there's literally so many people out there that it would be amazing, to be in a relationship with them. And that goes into the spiritual bucket for me. It's the connectedness where you can cultivate those communities. I have in the latter part of high school, I worked as a cook in a restaurant called Coco's. And in a couple of weeks, there's a group of us 8 that have got together just about every single year. In a couple of weeks, they're going to meet me right here in my music studio. And some of them are musicians. We're going to play. I've kept that going all these years. And to the credit of the rest of the group, it's so cool, so much fun. it's like, oh my gosh, there's communities everywhere where we can cultivate, but it's not something that just happens or doesn't happen. You have to take the time to do it. What are your thoughts on effectively cultivating connectedness through community so people aren't feeling so alone, like you were talking about earlier?
Yeah. So the numbers are pretty terrifying. You're talking about 25 to 40% of men say they don't have one close friend or confidant in their lives. That's a lot. I mean, when you think about 8 billion people on the planet, that's a lot of loneliness that's happening there. You need someone to share your wins, which is just as important as sharing your difficulties with. And like you said, when you're at the top, maybe other people don't want to hear about your wins because, you're making an extra digit in terms of your salary than everyone else that's around you. But I think, Lee, you actually capture one of the very important strategies, which is think more laterally about where you find your social networks. It doesn't have to be around your work. You need a few psychological needs met in your social world. The need for belonging, which I love, that's centered to your values and the values of your organizations. The need to feel like you have a sense of mastery, that you can modify your environment or control your environment as you see fit. And the third one is a sense of competence, that you feel as if like you have agency and energy to pursue whatever it is that you want to pursue, your passions to happen there. And so for you, meeting these people in the restaurant world, but you're hanging around music is great because it doesn't matter the domain. What matters is that your needs are met. And when your needs are met, you have enough in your emotional reservoir that it can carry over into whatever the next task is. So if you're having trouble in your romantic world, there's one way of going about this is directly by trying to fix and improve your relationship, maybe with a couples counseling or whatever it is. But the other one is improve other features of your life. So you show up with more wholeness and you don't take things as every single statement that's directed towards you as it's a threat, it's a stab at you, it's an attack at you, because your needs are being met elsewhere. And that's another way of improving your relationships. And think of work the same way, is that if work's not going well for whatever reason, think about how you're getting exercise, taking care of your body. Think about if you're getting intellectual stimulation. Maybe it's fiction books. Maybe it's watching Modern Family and entertaining yourself. But what you don't want to do is have all your cognitive eggs in one basket, because then when there's a threat there, because it's not always going to go well, now it's going to feel as if your entire sense of self has taken a fall to some degree.
Yeah, I mean, you're getting at the core of what I think makes this work for me. And I think there's way too much stratification of worth based on material accumulation, whatever that is. And all these relationships that I'm talking about in different communities I interact with, I'm a lot more focused on the emotional energy and the connectedness piece of it. And even if you're a super low income, parent, sometimes in fact, quite often, the emotional energy and connectedness value being created there is so much more than folks I know with a ton of money. And I would rather hang out in their world than, in this world where people are talking about what they have and doing all this stratification. So to me, that's a huge difference. So help me understand even more why that works so well.
Yeah. So my co-author of the last book, The Upside of Your Dark Side, Robert Biswas Diener, he did a study where he compared streetwalkers in Calcutta to homeless people in Vancouver to just regular people living in Fresno, California. It's a pretty cool sample because you have in India, Calcutta, if you are a prostitute, your kids don't get to go to the public education system. You have to homeschool them. You're not allowed. Your kids get the scar and the stigma from your work tied to them. It's a terrible societal, cultural artifact. And so, as you would expect, those prostitutes tend to have lower well-being than regular citizens in Calcutta. But if you break it down by domain, just what you're saying, their social world, their social connections are so strong because they are fighting against a very obviously contaminated, problematic system together. So what happens is these streetwalkers band together. Whoever's going to work, the other ones do the cooking, the other ones watch the kids, the other ones teach their kids. It's so interconnected that their social network is stronger and more intertwined than people that make more money. And when you compare their well-being in the social world, there is no significant difference from other people that live in Calcutta. And there's something to be said about this. You look at the bright spots in dark recesses of society and say, what are they doing differently? Is they have created interconnected networks. Now, what do people that are more well off do? We hang out in our fiefdoms. We wall off our properties. We've moved from having front porches in the 1970s to really extensive backyards in the 2000s and forward. And so what happens is people aren't just hanging around anymore. And lower income areas, often people are hanging out in the front of their houses because they don't have the big backyards. And if you have to really think about this psychologically, which one feels the best, but which one does the best for you? It feels really good, as you're saying, like to have this material accumulation that I can afford this massive backyard and pool and these beautiful cherry blossom trees. But what does better for you is being in the front of your house and you're hanging out and socializing and chilling with people and kind of playing ball or just shooting the crap out there or just, playing cards or throwing marbles on the ground or just kind of running around or just walking around. And so we're doing society wise often the opposite to meet our psychological needs because what we think is going to work for us is really asymmetrically related to what's actually works for us.
Yeah, and I would even go so far as to say having the big backyard and all of that it's something that you think is supposed to feel good. But what really feels better is being in the front yard with the neighbors, building community and doing all of that. And that's, gosh, it's really just missed, out there. And so it kind of goes back to how do we think about feeling better and better and better over time, leading a fulfilled life or whatever that is. I think that's the challenge. I see a lot of folks struggling right now, and you've talked about some of the numbers out there. And I
Yeah.
think this discussion is going to help a lot of folks look at it a little bit, more deeply. I think there's also a challenge of how do we get it out there? And I think you do such a good job of this in language that's consumable by a much larger percentage of the population instead of just a few intellectuals at the top.
No, thank you. I appreciate that. That's really why I do newsletters and write books. And really, we've all been trained to focus on feeling good, especially, American citizens. But really, it's doing good is what leads you to feeling good. And the other way around is the wrong directional arrow to do. So just as an example for me, I know by the end of the day, sometimes I'm just exhausted. I've got 3 kids. I got, multiple jobs, got all your relationships. And then I know that if I go to the gym over a nap, I'm going to have more energy. But my body is saying like, oh man, just take that nap. Like just like a 30-minute nap. Maybe it'll be like, maybe it'll be more like Barcelona-ish and it'll be like a 3-hour nap. My body wants that, but I remember the doing. So I have to, it's not a habit. I have to remind myself, if you go to the gym, you are going to be in your body. You're going to be vertical. You're going to feel alive and you're not even going to need a nap. But I have to, it's very effortful. And I think each one of us has an effortful choice point between options that we often know the effortful one is the one by doing good is going to be better for us, but we choose the less effortful one because of inertia. Like inertia guides most of our decision. I cannot tell you because I'm the psychologist in every neighborhood that I live in. And unfortunately, they find out how many people tell me their relationship woes. The amount of people that I meet, particularly men who have been in relationships for 7, 10 years, whereas the last time they held the hands of their romantic partner, much less hugged them, much less actually kiss them. It's very common and nobody wants to talk about it because the stigma is off the charts. But if you don't discuss it, it goes back to interoceptive awareness. If you don't become aware of what this might be doing to you psychologically and socially, to be with someone on a daily basis and not have your needs met, you have to try to understand what is the downstream effect of living this life. And what would be the consequence really if I revealed this to someone else? What if they said, you're a terrible person. You made a terrible choice in your partner. You're probably a bad partner. What are the odds that's what they're going to say versus, oh my God. All right. Well, let's figure this out. Like, okay, like, are you doing this? Are you doing this? Are you doing this? I mean, most likely you're going to get someone that really wants to help you. And if there's any message from this, it's doing good over feeling good. Like, go reveal the thing that's on your mind and see what happens. And go take these behavioral experiments and don't talk about sports. Don't talk about the political election. Talk about something meaningful that's been bugging you for years and see what happens. And I think people will be pleasantly surprised of people love being there for their friends.
Yeah. And in those difficult conversations, I've learned, at least personally, that those are the first ones I want to have, whether it's professionally, interpersonal, whatever. To go right there. Something you said in the book that I just love is, strive not to be an expert on anything, because you stop listening and paying attention, and you kind of get to a place where, to varying degrees, you think you know everything, so you're not helpful anymore. And I view that in relationships. Everybody's on a journey, and hopefully they're all growing. Let's support and enjoy being part of that with them. And I think that may be, at least that's what I'm getting from what you're saying, a big part of having a successful relationship. There's no end to where that can go and how deep it can develop.
So in the lines of insubordination, I mean, the typical question we ask when we meet a couple is, how'd you guys meet? And I would try to create a society where you ask them, when they tell you how many years they've been together, like, how are you keeping together being somewhat north of neutral at 8 years, at 17 years, at 51 years? Because that's the collective wisdom that's going to be helpful. It's interesting to hear origin stories, but that's actually not collective wisdom that's going to be useful to you. That's just useful for their autobiographies.
Yeah. I've got some friends in South Carolina, been married over 60 years now, and they're just as happy as all get out when you're around them. And they'll argue and they'll do whatever, but they're really strong together and genuinely love and care for each other. It's so cool to see them. They're one of my sets of adopted parents, and hopefully I can get them out here this spring to spend a week with me. All right. So building mental fortitude. How do we strengthen our sort of, psychological, well-being, or, how do we stay strong in all this? If we're going to go forward, be uncomfortable, we're going to be dissenting, defying, but in a productive way. How do we protect ourselves? It's so hard out there right now, man. People are brutal.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think people have stopped saying cancel culture doesn't exist. I think they've realized that that's no longer a factual statement, which is good, because the peak keeps rising every single year. So this is the important first step. Psychoeducation is to know that you are probably going to be negatively evaluated, criticized, rejected, and maybe ostracized if you go really hard against the direction that the group that you're a member of is going. People particularly despise what I call black sheep. And those are, you're part of the group, but you're saying, I don't think you're doing this right. So the political example would be if you were a Democrat and you said, I don't think Biden should be the choice. So right now I'd be like, hey, listen, it's too late. You shouldn't be talking. You shouldn't be saying anything. You're ruining the election even by speaking, which of course is not true by itself. But by not allowing, to go back to something we said earlier, that dissenting voice to happen, you end up with these political problems. Because it doesn't matter whether they're right or wrong. You should be having a dialogue in terms of, what are our values? What do we actually want for the country in the next 4 years? Is this the way to go? And to suppress that conversation is to ensure a random fate for your entire group. So you should never want you shouldn't increase the amount of randomness into the equation if there's something that you can do to reduce uncertainty and randomness.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't would call it an experiment, but I just find this really interesting when people get to a certain place, high conflict, whatever you want to call it, And I liked Amanda Ripley's book, High Conflict, where she talks
Great
about this
book.
concept. It was so good to point that out. But, for me, and I spoke to the state of Vermont, 800 of their leaders. They asked me to come in and speak. So I did this virtually. And I said, well, here's how I think about, as a citizen, the responsibility of government, to continually improve the experience for the citizenry to work, live, learn, and play. And at the same time, continually over time, reduce the cost to cause those things to happen. That's how I know we're doing the right work. And so I'll say, here's things that I would do and policies I would put in place to cause these things to happen. And people will tell me, well, you should run, I'll vote for you, whatever the office is. And then I would say, but this person you're vehemently against, directionally, that's kind of where my policies would go. The only difference is I would go more aggressively in that direction to create better conditions, the way I describe it. But they can't even see it. They won't even look at it. What's happening from your view to where math, common sense, logic, facts, reason doesn't apply anymore when they get to a certain place?
Well, to some degree, it goes back to the question that I did not properly answer before, which is we have this real lack of intellectual humility. Is we forget about the curse of expertise, that once we think that we are well versed in a topic, that we've got this down and we're going to keep momentum and keep going forward. And so to your example is you come in, you bring fresh ideas. They are similar, but you're saying, I'm almost this like a little more extreme than the current person that you're already kind of is leading you. I'm this kind of, you're just like, you're like an amplifier. You're amplifying the energy, you're amplifying the commitment, you're improving the strategies, but you're in the same direction as the person. So it's really interesting is that they see you as, okay, here's Lee, the solution, as opposed to, oh, no, we're going to steal from you all these like psychological tools and add it to what we're already doing right now. Like you're not there to save the day to be the savior. You're there to kind of like improve everyone's skill set. It happens there. So that's a pretty good example of the low intellectual humility route, which is the answer's not here right now. And right in front of me is a new thing. I'm just going to glop onto that, as opposed to really thinking to yourself, what could we learn from Lee that we can kind of integrate into our own selves? So if you go back to the question you asked me before, which is how do we increase mental fortitude? We have to rethink about the value of doubt and all sorts of negative emotions. So in this case, this example of like you going to Vermont is about envy. I view envy as this really adaptive emotion that Lee's persuasive. He's cool under pressure. You're calm. You can hear your voice over the past 45 minutes. Like you're steady. You have equanimity that goes there. It's a very attractive quality in a leader that happens there. I could say, I want Lee to do all my speaking for me, which is kind of what happened in Vermont a little bit. It happens there. Or what is it that Lee does that makes me see that he's so calm that I can replicate and insert into my strategies? I'm not going to be Lee, but there's a way. Physically, you're kind of like in one place. Like you sit in one place and you're chill and you're not worried about interrupting, saying something witty, being smarter. You're like very comfortable in your skin in terms of, I'm just going to go with the flow with how the conversation goes. A lot of us say that, but I can watch you do that. I think as you start to figure out what are the strengths that I see in Lee that makes me envious of him, I could start breaking it down and then shoving it into little small behaviors that I'm going to steal myself. And so one of them I might take from just this conversation right now with you today is try not to be the one that has the zinger, like the really amazing comment, and really appreciate just fluid communication with another person. So it's little small behaviors. And that's a way of taking a negative emotion and seeing that it's productive. And over moment after moment, you can find there's benefits in anger, there's benefits in boredom, there's benefits in sadness, there's benefits in fear, and figure out none of us want these emotional states, but the reason we have them is they're communicating valuable information. As we start to realize about the wisdom of our emotional states and steal from that experience for a later date, we become stronger and wiser. When I get pissed off at someone on the road because they parked too close to me, that is an information in terms of me not having sufficient attribution and responsibility for how I parked my car. And that maybe I can actually be a little bit more self-compassionate and self-forgiving such that maybe often if I make too close to the park, I should realize, you know what? No one's going to notice if I reverse out and then repark back into the spot again. But most people don't do that, including myself. And so that anger episode reminds me of, you know what? I have lots of rooms for do-overs so I don't blow up at people.
Yeah. Yeah. Whenever I get angry and it makes no sense, it's definitely an emotional energy gauge. It's like, oops, I'm a little bit lower in the tank. When it's higher, I seem to be understanding of just about everything. One of the things I love this kind that you talk about in your book is when you're with someone and you're listening and you're asking questions, it's not to support your position and where you want to go. It's to keep them on track in the direction of the value where they're trying to go. And it's easy for folks, because you have to cultivate this too over time. I noticed to get off track, go down, different rabbit holes. And it's so helpful when they're with somebody that can keep them on the right track. They come up with things that they didn't know were there as they build on it. That is so cool. I mean, the way you bring that up, I just fascinated by that.
No, I appreciate this. We've done probably 15 studies like this in my laboratory, which is if someone shares a win, they accomplish something, they're just like proud of something, and they share that story, you have one goal. I want to get them to expand that story with more details than before. So you're going to be curious, you're going to ask questions, but your goal is not to say something like really profound, or it's not about to switch off into, oh my God, you got like your personal record on a bench press. Like, did I tell you about how I did like this like marathon? And like, it was the first time I did. It's not to spin off into you. Get them to talk more and reveal more details. What happens is they remember more details than they actually are verbalizing. So their memory is expanded. It's like it's bolded and italicized in their brain so that, because your brain, you're more likely to remember negative experiences than positive experiences. We have this negativity bias. You reverse that when you ask questions about positive events people share. But the other thing is to remember this. When they remember that event now, you're tied to it mentally in that long-term memory. Is like, there Lee was asking me questions, and I'm so appreciative because now I have more details about this really amazing thing that happened to me. So you keep on coming up and arising as in the associative network of their brain. Positive event, Lee. Positive memory, Lee. Their relationships being strengthened over and over again just by you making them elaborate on the story when they first do the reveal.
Love that. I literally have 80 topics that I wanted to talk to you about today, and we just got to a few of them. One last question before we wrap this up. When I'm going towards creating value in a certain direction, and I do think about it holistically, what takes me off of that will be what you describe as this unwanted mental content. And it causes me to drift, and self-doubt, other things can kind of come in, which I laugh at because it always makes no sense when I step back and look at it. But what's your advice for the listeners around starting to sort of cull out unwanted mental contacts so they can stay focused on the value they're trying to create in the world?
Yeah, I mean, Lee, you just described it in layperson's terms of the most important skill is that we all have these. I think of it as like a stock ticker tape. Just constant, or like the banner for every news channel, right? Now I have banners of like breaking news that happens there. But in your brain, it's usually always something negative. Like, look at how much people are not paying attention to you. Look at the person yawning as you're in front of the room. Look at how much that they're checking their phone while they're talking to you. And so your brain is just kind of like going through this loop constantly of like, look how much you're babbling. Look how much you're talking compared to Lee. Oh my God, you're completely dominating this conversation and no one's even listening to you. When your brain does this, what you want to do is notice those thoughts and treat them metaphorically as separate from you. So there's me, Todd, and there are these thoughts that are produced by my brain. Now, I'm not saying there's dualism here. Like there's like mind and body, and those are two separate things. But you physically can look at those thoughts and say, you're babbling too much on this podcast. Let me look at that. I'm not going to challenge it. I'm not going to question it. I'm just going to notice it. I thought this is like not really evidence there. Lee's still asking me questions. I'm still enjoying myself immensely. That happens there. Okay. I'll just notice that thought and come back into the present moment. And by noticing it, what I've prevented, and this is kind of what you were saying about unwanted mental content. What I've done by noticing that thought is prevented me from trying to hide, conceal, or suppress that. Because when I try not to think about whether I'm babbling too much on a podcast, now it's going to bubble up more. Because when you put into your brain, don't think about how much you're babbling. Now you just talked about how much you're babbling. That goes in there. I've made it prominent. I've bolded it. I've italicized it. So now every time it comes up, I'm like, why did it come up a second time? That's the fifth time it's come up. And all of a sudden I treat it as if it's like a red, dangerous, glowing, nuclear fallout shelter is calling for you light that's appearing in my brain. But it's only because I've now told myself this is stuff not to think about because it's dangerous. It's threatening. So do the opposite. Go right into the mud. Go right into that thought. Look right at it and see these are just a string of letters that make words that your brain is producing, and that's all they are. But the key part of this is really don't get into a battle of you challenging your thoughts, which is what a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy that's being promoted by therapists is. This is a different approach. I'm going to diffuse it by showing, just some words that my brain's producing. Sometimes it's good stuff. Sometimes it's bad stuff. You know what? To come right back into the conversation with Lee. And that's, again, goes back to doing good versus trying to feel good.
Yeah, this is so great. I mean, you're speaking to something that foundationally is maybe the most important thing everybody should be focusing on, so everything else is better for them going in. Todd, if our listeners want to learn more about the work that you're doing, subscribe to your blog, et cetera, where can they learn about that?
So everything's on my website. You can subscribe for free to my Provoke Substack. Just go to toddkashdan.com and download all my research for free, 250 articles, jump on the newsletter for free.
Okay, I'm definitely going to do that, read a couple more of your books as well. This has been a real pleasure for me today. Thank you so much. This has been, again, the Show Your Value podcast. And if you got some value out of today's episode, please like and leave a review. And until next time, please go out and show your value to the world.